All right. For the audience that does not know each of you, please introduce yourself. James, go first.
Hey everyone, I am James R. Fitzgerald, Fitz for short. I'm a retired FBI supervisory special agent, 31 years in law enforcement, and I've been retired now since 2007. I'm kind of mostly well known for working the Unabomb case, but I had a whole life before that and a whole life after that. I wrote 3 books, fourth to be coming out soon, all titled A Journey to the Center of the Mind. And Ray Carr, our other guest, and I co-host the Cold Red podcast. So that's a brief summary of me, and I want to hear all about Ray now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ray Carr. I was an FBI agent for 26 years. Before that, I worked in corrections. So I have a total of 36 years in law enforcement. I have 5 college degrees. My last one is a doctoral degree, a Doctor of Education degree in organizational leadership, where I teach at Wilmington University. And I'm also the director of a criminal justice institute there. And I also have written a book. It's in reference to a bank robber who robbed banks for 30 years before he was caught.
Okay, so going off of that, the first question I wanted to ask, just get right into it, is between both of you, you both worked cases that dealt with extremely unique and interesting individuals. More famous, I should say, being the Unabomber, and then on Ray's side, Carl Gugasian, I believe was his name, right? So starting with Ray, going backwards, what did you learn about what motivated Carl?
The funny thing is that Carl was motivated because he thought that he was not eligible to work in the real world. He was arrested as a juvenile and spent some time in a juvenile hall in a place called Camp Hill, which is up in the middle of Pennsylvania, which is now an adult facility, but at the time was a juvenile facility back in the 60s. And when he came out, he met a counselor who told him that he would never be able to get a job and that would follow him the rest of his life. So he studied hard, got a scholarship to Villanova, went to Villanova University, did very well, came out, and he was going to a job fair at Villanova University. And most of the jobs that he was going for, because he was his major was electrical engineering, were government jobs for most engineers. So there was a background check. And he was concerned that the background check would eliminate him. So he enlisted in the military. So he eventually was getting ready to get out of the military. He says, I have to find something to do. And he was reading a newspaper article in the early 70s and saw a bank that was robbed down in North Carolina, right outside of Fort Bragg. And the individual got like $40,000, which is a lot of money back in 1970, 71. It's a lot of money. You could buy a big 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath house with that money and still have enough left over to buy a Cadillac, and then still have some left over. So it gives you an idea of how much money that really was. And that was really what he did. So he never really had a job other than being in the military. Was his really only job that he had.
So going off of that, now to James, what did you learn about what motivated the Unabomber?
George, please call me Fitz. It's my lifelong nickname, and you're welcome to use it here. Ted Kaczynski, well, we didn't know his name at first, but when we did the profile, and I came in into a 17-year-long investigation, and within 9 months, we had the Unabomber identified and arrested. But his early profiles was someone who really doesn't like himself, brilliant, but he thinks he's too smart for the rest of the world. And he has all kinds of issues and frustrations, and most likely psychological issues also. And that all played out to be accurate. He was brilliant, graduated high school at 16, at Harvard at 16, graduated there at age 20, PhD by the time he was 25. Brilliant guy, but just couldn't deal very well with society. upon reading, I had the advantage. I interviewed Carl Gugasian with Ray, and we found out a lot of what he just related after the fact during a post-conviction interview. I had the advantage with Ted Kaczynski. He didn't talk to anyone, no agents anywhere, despite what the miniseries Manhunt Unabomber shown. That was kind of the one major part they got wrong. The rest of it's pretty good. But he didn't talk to any agents. But luckily, we had his manifesto and the 1,000 separate documents that we found inside his cabin. And I came to the conclusion back then, and I hold it to this day, that essentially Ted Kaczynski was an incel. Now, that word wasn't around back then. And for your listeners and your audience, incel means involuntarily celibate. That means a guy who's basically not really having any intimate relationships with women. In his case, he was a straight male. In fact, he went to prison never having been intimate with a woman at all. And we did an early report preparing for his trial about the 20 different women in his life that he just had very awkward situations with. One or two he dated, the rest were like a distance. So again, and I see this with people today. I even see this as the shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania. I have no doubt it'll come out that he's an incel, whether he subscribes to the, to the website or follows their teachings in some formal way. Maybe not, but I think you see a lot of young men, and Kaczynski went into his 50s bombing people to kill them. And I think you'll see this level of social retardation. That's a word he even used. He called himself that in ways, and he blamed his parents. I think that's really the essence of what caused him to want to kill people.
So this is only to James, and it's the fact that the Unabomber is one of, I guess the right word might be publicly supported, right, in the modern era. One of the more publicly supported terrorists, right? Somebody that people tend to sympathize with. I don't personally, but many people will say the argument that the Unabomber was this, he had a point, basically, was what a lot of people get at. And if you read his book, which I actually did listen to the audiobook in preparation for this, he makes certain points. You can tell he's writing very in-depth, and he's thinking very in-depth about a lot of these topics. And his overall point is that industrial society has basically ruined mankind. Now, what are your thoughts on the fact that he, in spite of being a murderer and terrorist and everything in between, what are your thoughts on the fact that he's supported heavily in the modern, like today, right? All these years later.
Yeah, good question. I've been asked this in various forms before. And quite frankly, when I was reading the manifesto for the first time, was on a flight from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, July 5th, 1995. I remember looking at some of this saying, this guy, he's not that far off in some of his ideas. But then I'd have to shake my head and say, wait, he's a serial killer. And that doesn't justify, the killings don't justify his thoughts don't justify the killings. But I found myself not necessarily disagreeing with some of what he wrote. And of course, when eventually we got inside his cabin, the 1,000 separate documents, journal, autobiography, and notes and memoirs, other things he kept, I really could deep dive into his psyche. So I get people, and I think he's proven to be more prescient today than ever. I think our industrialized society, if not our technological society, and you're a young guy, George, but I mean, that's some of it. You grew up from your earliest days with cell phones and access to the internet. Ray and I didn't, and I think we do see a cultural shift and an altered paradigm than how when we grew up. Mm-hmm. Some of it's good. It's nice to be connected. It's nice when parents know where their young kids are and can check on them. But there can also be very much downsides. And I think Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, was picking in on that. I understand some people focusing on his revelatory opinions and positions about the evils of leftism, the evils of big medicine, of big entertainment, of big business. And he He wasn't really a Democrat or Republican, it seems, but he disliked both parties. He hated psychology and psychologists. Most social science he was against. But yeah, like the broken clock that's right twice a day. For younger people, there's clocks with hands on them that can actually be right twice a day, as opposed to the digital versions. In almost every chapter, there's a few things he gets right. But and if he didn't kill people, who knows what kind of platform he would have had after all these years. But he chose to get his message out there by killing innocent people, indirect targets, and it cost him the rest of his life, from about 30 years it locked away in solitary confinement in the Supermax in Colorado. So feel free to look at some of his ideas. Just don't mimic his actions to carry them out.
So now going from Ray to Fitz.
Or the other way around.
Fitz to Ray?
Yeah, to Ray first and then to Fitz, yeah. Okay. I was going to say, did you guys feel any sympathy for the main two people that you put away? Or any people in general that you put away, but starting off with those two?
I can't speak for Kaczynski, but I can speak for Gugasian. And Gugasian believed that he should have never been caught. He was upset that he got caught. And I'm sure Kaczynski was the same. But, Carl Gugasian, he believed that what he did in robbing banks for that period of time, he referred to it in conversations I had with him over time as his career. I mean, most people have a career in accounting, in medicine, in nursing, in teaching. His career he was a career criminal. So did I have any empathy for him? I didn't feel sorry for him, but he got what he deserved. I think he got off very, very very lucky with the sentence that he received, and that's because of the amount of cooperation that he provided to both myself and Jim throughout all the interviews that we did with him. But the one thing that I know Jim does this too, but the one thing that I always treated anybody that I arrested with dignity and respect, and never looked down on them, and treated them like a human being, treated them like I'd want to be treated if it was me on the other side.
As far as Kaczynski, no, I never felt sorry for him at all. He had a decent childhood. He was raised in the same house as a brother 7 years younger than him, and his brother turned out fine. And sort of like the Greek tragedy that it was his own brother that, once we published the manifesto in September of '95, it was his own brother that eventually read it, then eventually contacted a lawyer, who eventually contacted the FBI. Then we had to build our case from there. So that brother turned out just fine. He's a good man. There was $1 million reward for the capture of the Unabomber. He took it, but after some legal cost, he gave everything out to the victims of his brother. So he's a stand-up guy. So you have two people on the opposite end, or I should say on the actual end of the spectrum, from, I won't do a clinical psychological evaluation, but sort of a bad guy but brilliant, and a good guy and brilliant. That would be David. And so I didn't feel sorry for him. Ironically, I had a bank robber I arrested in New York City when I was there in my early days, in my first 7 years in the bureau, and he got strung out on drugs, and he always claims he would never hurt anybody. He never carried a gun, but he pretended he did in his pocket. He may even had a fake gun for some of the robberies, and I actually kind of felt sorry for him, that I actually treated him like a gentleman, like a man, even though I put him in prison, and he started cooperating with me. He helped foil the kidnapping of a judge's son, and then gave me some information on some outlaw bikers. And he was actually kind of a good guy until drugs got the better of him, and we had to revoke his parole, and he went back in the joint. I lost track of him, but I kind of felt sorry for him. I kind of took him under my wing, and he gave me some really good information, perhaps saved a life or two. And but if drugs control you, or perhaps alcohol, whatever your addiction may be, it can ruin many a person. So I try not to get too emotional about my arrests. I know Ray didn't either, but every once in a while, you may be a few of them out there that you do feel sorry for.
George, let me add this one more thing to this here. And I know Jim feels this, and I know I can speak for both of us here. My empathy did not sit with the offender. My empathy rested with the victims. And these individuals, they've done horrendous things, whether it's robbing a bank or whether it's sending a bomb through the mail. A lot of people suffered, and not just the people that were killed, but the family members of those people. Those are the people that I have empathy for. Those are the people that I care about. Those are the people that I did my job for, and Jim did his job for, to be able to help those people out, to be able to stop the victimization that those people were receiving.
Yeah, and let me add to this too, George. I contacted Kaczynski twice, in 2007 and again in 2016, trying to set up an interview with him. And both times, and it's actually wrote a letter to him in 2016. It's in my third book, the whole letter itself, which he never responded to. But while I didn't kiss his butt, so to speak, I said, look, you're in prison. You're there because you should be. But all these years later, your manifesto made sense in some ways. Let's talk about it. Let's see what issues that maybe you tried to get across back in the 80s and 90s, but didn't quite get the audience that you would have liked. And I thought I'd give him another chance to do that, maybe tied into the mini series we were making. I told him up front that's what was happening. Let's get your voice in here, Ted, so it'll be an accurate representation. But he decided not to respond to me, and that's life. So I'll never have that advantage. And of course, he died about 14 months or so ago, and my last chance to talk to him is now gone. So again, but I never felt sorry for him. And yet, to reiterate what Ray said, I met some of the victims. I was in the courtroom the day in Sacramento, California, when Kaczynski was sentenced, and I heard some of the victim statements. And it made me almost want to cry. Not quite, but the mother who lost her husband, whose child could have been killed, except the child happened to walk around the corner from the kitchen to the dining room when the father opened up the package and it exploded, cut him in half. That could have been the daughter too. So I never felt sorry for Kaczynski, never put him on a pedestal. Did he have a few good ideas in the manifesto? Yeah, but that's not good enough to take it to the next level of any kind of sympathy or empathy.
What do you think the biggest lesson, going from Fitz to Ray, so the other way around this time, what do you think the biggest lesson that each of you have learned in your careers is? Like the biggest, most important lessons that in however long your career, both of yours were, however long it was, like what was the biggest lesson, or maybe even the biggest lessons?
Ray, I think that's you.
Oh, is it me? Okay.
Well, no. I meant Fitz first and then Ray.
Oh, okay. My bad. From the earliest days of my police career, I was a police officer for 11 years in suburban Philadelphia, and then joined the Bureau in 1987. So 31 years in law enforcement. And I guess we brought up victims already, and quite frankly, our Cold Red podcast, it's really focused on victims. We'll bring in, investigators and officers and agents, whatever. Occasionally, people that went to prison, right, Ray, that are now out, and they have their own stories to tell, and perhaps they victimize someone, but at least a few of those former convicts we had on, they were sort of victimized themselves in their early years, and there was some level of justification. But I just always felt being honest and truthful to the good guys and the bad guys, and doing my best to treat them fairly is the lesson that I learned early on. I had, a few good training officers when I started out. Some weren't so good, but I kind of learned to separate the good from the bad. And then the FBI certainly had, all good training agents. And And I just learned, yeah, you don't make stuff up. You don't abuse the system you're in. When you're given that badge and that gun, you hold a special place in our society, in our culture. We are the new centurions. We are the ones not only protecting, the administration, the government, but actually protecting the people around us. And we are part of those people. And I always took that very serious. I never abused it. Never had any major disciplinary problems as an officer, even minor ones, never had them. And because I took the job very serious. And I remember growing up, and I wrote this in my second book. I was never the star athlete. I wasn't the fastest or the best musician, anything like that. But when I put that badge on as a cop, within a few weeks, I said, you know what? I'm going to make myself the best law enforcement officer possible. And I remember it was a Christmas night. I was working. My partner went in the house with his wife and kids. He invited me, and I said, no, you stay with your family. And it was snowing outside in the Cornwall section of Ben Salem Township, Pennsylvania. And I kind of looked in the mirror. I was outside and saw my reflection with the police hat on. 3 months later, 3 months before that, I had long hair and, didn't shave most of the time. All of a sudden, I have a, real short haircut as a police officer and, cleanly shaved every day. I said, you know what? This is my life. I'm going to dedicate myself to the people around me and to honoring this badge that I had bestowed upon me. So be fair, be honest, be truthful. And there are many bad guys. I have no doubt. I won't say many, but there are certainly a handful of bad guys in my police career, FBI career. I really know they did the crime, but I just couldn't get the probable cause to arrest them and know they would be convicted. Not every officer or agent would follow that credo, but I did. And I know Ray did too. We talked about some cases. And I also know the ones I did arrest, I've never lost a case. There's never been an appeal where anything was overturned. And I think there was one passenger in a stolen car that I had charged, and the jury didn't find him guilty because he said he was a hitchhiker, which that wasn't the case. But the driver got convicted. So I feel pretty good that we, in terms of what I learned from life, my parents imparted in me, be honest, be truthful, and everything will fall your way. And that still works for me to this day.
Well, jumping on Jim, one of the biggest things is to be honest and treat people the way you want to be treated. And if you do that, you're going to do very, very well. One of the biggest things I learned is be a good listener. People a lot of times try and gather as much information as they can, but they don't listen. And sometimes you miss it. But I'll tell you what I was told my first week on the job by my training agent in Buffalo, New York. He said, Ray, he said, it's easy to do the right thing when people are looking. But what will define you is what you do when nobody's looking. And I kind of followed that advice all the way through my career. I always did the right thing no matter what. And it didn't, like Jim said, it didn't matter. It didn't matter what color you were. It didn't matter what political party you were with. None of those things matter. We were professionals and we did our job the best way that we knew how. Those were my takeaways.
And Ray, you said we always did the right thing, and I agree with that. Doesn't mean we were perfect or didn't make honest clerical mistakes or something like that. We're human beings after all, but we always did it with honor and integrity and fidelity, all the FBI credo, I suppose. At the same time. So I guess that's why we're still friends after all these years. Yep. I mean, we both knew agents. I won't say they were dishonest or corrupt, but maybe sometimes they looked another way or handled things a certain way. Certainly some police officers I know from back in the day, I won't even say they broke the law or committed crimes, but just maybe some ethical issues that I said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And that Christmas night in 1976, I just made a pledge to myself, and I've honored it ever since.
I remember a guy talking about that, and I remember a guy who said agents. And it was an agent that was on the drug squad and he got in trouble on the drug squad. They sent him over to bank robbery squad when I was in Philadelphia. And he came over, and his name was Ken Withers. Nice guy. He was on the SWAT team. We were on the SWAT team together. And I remember he had some sort of disorder, and it was a blood disorder, and he thought he was going to die. And he was asking, some things, and circle back another 4 or 5 months down the road. And Ken Withers had stolen 8 kilos of brown heroin from the evidence locker in Philadelphia and shipped it down to his place in Kentucky, thinking he was going to sell it, take care of his family. Well, he got caught. And he did 20 years. He's out now. He did 20 years down in the prison down in North Carolina, but he's out now. But I remember that. Now, I wasn't involved in the investigation, but I know the agents that were involved in the investigation with Ken. And talk about a guy that, you were standing next to it, you needed to protect you. And here he is, he's stealing drugs from the drug locker. It was quite a shock to a lot of guys because we never thought he would do something like that. Nobody would ever think that, but those are the things that happen. So here's my advice to any new agents out there.
Or officers.
Or officers, correct. It takes years and years to build your ability, but it only takes 10 seconds to destroy it. And that can be just one lie, that you lie or don't tell the truth about something, and it destroys your career. So always, always be honest.
Yeah, not to pick on bad agents or cops, but one of my first arrests in New York City in 1988 was a pedophile FBI agent who was abusing kids on a soccer team in Nassau County, Long Island, New York. And we finally had to, work that. I wasn't one of the prime investigators. I was only on for a few months at the time, but I definitely interviewed some of the kids, their parents. And and my first few months in the profiling unit in Quantico in 1995 wound up one of the agents was arrested for being a Russian spy, and they put him. It wasn't Hansen, no, it was someone else, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. But he was arrested, and I got to know him a little bit there. But they purposely put him in Quantico to keep him out of harm's way, where he had no more access to classified information. So again, out of the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of agents over the years, we mentioned a few bad ones here. They are definitely the exception to the norm.
That's correct.
We learned some lessons in life. Those guys didn't, and they all went to jail. At least I think the pedophile is still in jail, and I think the former spy is now out. And your guy, we should try to get them on Cold Red, right? Maybe make some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Ken Withers since he got locked up. I don't know. I don't even know where he's at now. I could probably look him up and find him. We have our ways.
Ken Withers is his name?
Ken Withers, Withers. Kenneth.
Okay. I'm looking him up too. I'll
and real quick, the spy arrested in 1995 was Earl Pitts.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right.
PITTS or
yes.
PITS?
PITTS.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that one later. But for right now, continuing off that corruption part, right, and bad agents. I've had many FBI agents on, and I've had this discussion about corruption and flaws in the justice system. When it came to both of you, and I want Ray to answer first, what do you think the biggest flaw you saw in the justice system was in your career? Maybe on your end, in the prosecution, but just one major flaw in the justice system.
The system's pretty good. It does the right thing. I think the one drawback with it is that it's very slow, but it does do the right thing when it needs to do the right thing. Could I sit here and say, there's a case that I think we should have arrested somebody when we didn't, and I remember having enough information on a bank robber that was a serial robber. Now, when I'm talking serial, he probably robbed maybe 14 banks in the Philadelphia area in maybe a 3-month period. And he just kept hitting bank after bank, and he was a drug user. We knew who he was. And I went to the prosecutor, said, look, we know who this guy is. He's using. Let us go arrest him to stop him from robbing banks, because he was going in with a weapon. I said, eventually, he may hurt somebody. And if he hurts somebody, I want you to know that I'm on record documenting that I told you that we should lock this guy up. So if something doesn't happen, and this guy hurts somebody, then it's going to come back on you, not on the FBI. And I had a warrant that afternoon. So there are things, when you look at things and you look at the justice system, I think power is an issue. I think sometimes, not everybody, but there are times when people get a little bit of power and it becomes misused, whether it's at the agent level or it gets up into management. That can be a problem, not only in the prosecutor's office, but also in agents and in other law enforcement circles. Yeah, well, some people get a little bit too much power and they don't know how to handle it. I think that's a problem too.
Yeah, I won't argue anything Ray just said. I will bring it more to sort of a working environment. And Ray, I'm sure you can attest to this. There are some agents and investigators, detectives, that when they're working a case, they can get myopic. They can put horse blinders on, and they see one suspect or a pair of suspects or whatever, and they just focus on them, and they're not willing to consider other options or alternatives. And the time I saw this to its highest level, certainly in my career, was during the 2001 anthrax case, Amerithrax, as they called it in the Bureau. And it happened right after 9/11, anthrax going through the mail. 5 people died, other people sick. The U.S. Capitol had to be shut down, for a day or two because of these letters coming in. And we profilers put out a profile of the offender, and it turns out it was right on when an individual was eventually identified and approached. However, there was a task force that the Bureau put together, and they didn't really invite us profilers in, and they focused on one individual, a former biohazard, PhD person, a biochemist, and we said, this is not your guy. This is not your guy. And they were following him around. They were searching his house. They drained a pond near his house, looking for, equipment he threw away. And I was actually called into the director's office, Director Mueller back then. This is like around 2004. Hey, profilers, what do you see? We said, it's not this guy you're looking at. It's someone kind of like him, but someone else. And here are some factors. Okay, thank you. We don't need your help anymore. And that person who was being followed wound up suing the Bureau, suing some others, made a lot of money, deservedly so, because he was wrongly accused, never arrested, but he was that person of interest, POI. And a few years later, before I retired, a new task force was formed. They came to me before I retired and said, we think we have eyes on someone. I said, well, this guy matches the profile much better, doesn't he? And in 2008, he was identified, but then his name was Bruce Ivins, but then he wound up killing himself right before the police were going to, or the FBI were going to indict him, arrest him, whatever. But I'm convinced with all the evidence that was related to me, he was in fact the anthrax person. So my point is, you don't want to get these blinders on. And I guess in more recent times, we don't have to get into this too heavily, but I think we have to be careful that we don't let our political partisanship, certainly in the DOJ or the FBI or other federal agencies, get in the way of doing an objective, honest investigation, analysis, intel gathering, whatever it may be. And I think sometimes, those horse blinds can be put on in that regard too, but more from a political perspective than anything else. And I don't think your rank and file agents are involved in that, but time has told over the last few years, a few of the management members in the FBI were way out of line in terms of some things they were doing. So that has to be curtailed also, and a cautionary tale to stay away from that type of behavior. It goes back to being honest, truthful, and having integrity, like Ray and I said about 20 minutes ago.
So, following that up, do either of you, starting with Fitz, do you have any major regrets in your career? Like, and if so, what's the biggest one?
I'm not sure I've ever been asked that before. I guess I've thought it. Sometimes I wish I got into the bureau earlier, but there was a hiring freeze in the mid 1980s, and there was just no way for that to happen. I went through some political BS in my police department. That's captured in my second book, and I wound up suing my police department. I wish none of that happened, but I wasn't going to kiss anybody's butt, and I wasn't going to do things I shouldn't be doing, and that's why I was on the bad guy list at my police department. So yeah, sometimes say, oh, I wish I didn't go to that police department, maybe did something else. But it really prepared me for the rest of my life. I knew so well how to handle myself, how to address myself. How I knew the difference between right and wrong, certainly in the workplace, certainly from an office politics perspective. So, but regrets, no. I think all of life is built upon foundational blocks, and some may go in a little bit crooked, some may be a little wobbly at one point, but eventually other blocks on top of it will solidify them and make you the person that you are. So yeah, there's no case that I blew. There's no false arrest that I made, anything like that. I'm sure there are little things down the line somewhere, but the biggest mistake I made was when I was a store detective. My first job out of college was a store detective in a department store in downtown Philadelphia. Back then, you could actually arrest shoplifters, unlike in many large cities today. And we would technically detain them, because we were civilians, call the police. They would arrest them. But I remember I had to go testify in my first trial. And I just, oh yeah, I remember that case from 6 months ago. I think I just pulled out the face copy of it, and I just, I was testifying with the prosecutor, direct testimony, just put some things out there, and the defense attorney really started asking some good questions, and I wasn't prepared. I didn't lie or anything like that. I just couldn't answer some things, even like what was the temperature outside that day? What was I wearing? What was the person wearing? I didn't bother looking at a Polaroid picture we took back then of the defendant. And so, do I regret that poor bit of testimony? Yes. I'm not sure whatever happened to that case. I think he was still convicted or pleaded out to something. But that taught me it'll never happen again. When I went to the police department, a year later, and I was doing great in my testimonies, even for traffic tickets, things like that. And some of my colleagues I went through the academy with, it was their first time testifying, and they got caught up with some, snarky defense attorney and not knowing how to answer certain questions. So my biggest regret was probably the first time I ever testified in court. That's also in my first book, and it was kind of embarrassing, and I never let that happen again.
I have a question, Jim. Was he convicted, the shoplifter?
Ultimately, he was.
That's all that matters, Jim. That's all that matters.
Good point.
Well, in reference to me, I have no regrets, and I'm happy to say that I've, ever since I was a kid, I always left everything on the field, and I did the same thing with the bureau. I didn't take anything home with me. I didn't leave anything hanging. I left on some good terms, so I'm very happy with my career and how it progressed.
Well, that's good to hear. So now, Ray, first, what was one of the most meaningful moments of your career?
It was a case that involved a gang in the city of Chester. They were called the Boyle Street Boys, and they were a huge drug organization. Some of the drug guys were making $10,000 a day. But that's not why we got involved in the case. It was myself and my partner from DEA. But we got involved because of the killings, and accumulated when they killed a cop who was a friend of mine. Uh, and the police officer, Mike Beverly, I did a thing, a homicide in the city, and there's another one coming out, I think, in the fall, homicide in Philadelphia, um, where I was also interviewed for that in reference to the Beverly case. And Mike Beverly was coming out of a house, and a guy popped out of the bushes, turned on Mike Beverly, and shot him once in the chest with a 45, and it hit him in the chest. It dropped him to the ground, and then the guy put 3 more bullets in his head. I'm sitting at home at 10 o'clock at night, and the news comes on, and it's flash information. Chester police officer shot and killed, and they identify him as Mike Beverly. I didn't identify him that night, but I got calls, and it was him. And this same group of individuals also killed 5 other individuals. So they killed 6 individuals, and that's what kind of tipped the scale for me. So that's probably one of the most meaningful cases that I worked, to bring all those individuals to justice. And that was the first death penalty case in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Now, none of those individuals received life sentences plus 30 years. So we didn't charge them with all the homicides, but different individuals. But we arrested about 45 people that were tied into that gang. So that was the most memorable, bringing all those people to justice and bringing closure to the families. Because one of the individuals that was also killed was a ATF informant that was ready to testify in the federal grand jury on a Monday, and on a Sunday night, the gang, as she was going to work, she worked last out. She worked like from 11 to 7 at a Rite Aid in an adjacent town. She went out and got in her car. An individual came up to the car, fired once inside the window, and then reached inside and fired again. She had 2 little kids. One was 3 and the other was 1.5. So to be able to bring closure to that family and to Mike's family, and Mike had 5 children, so when you look at that and you see now someone has to grow up without a father because someone did something that was just so horrible. So that's my most memorable, and what brought me the most joy in bringing closure to that.
Yeah, there's a number of cases I can relate to. I mean, helping give, as a police officer, women in labor, helping with the delivery of babies, stuff like that, if not directly, indirectly. But remember a case of a woman like in her 30s, brought her like 12-year-old niece into me, and it was I was a police officer, and that the little girl's father was abusing her, and we're not going to get any details here, but very difficult to get this young girl to talk to me, an adult male, or not, a little bit younger than her father, but still. And finally, through the aunt, who was the sister-in-law of this man, we got enough to make an arrest. And one of the tougher arrests I ever made, it wasn't any fights or gunshots, but to take a dad out of a family, and the little girl was making these accusations, and we did actually prove the case. He ultimately admitted it. But the happy part of that, if it's possible at all, is around maybe 4 years later, at the police department, we used to do overtime details for the senior proms at Ben Salem High School. They wanted to make sure there'd be no problems at the prom, and we'd work there either in uniform. Actually, we would work in uniform, and I was a sergeant then. I was at one of these proms, and the kids are all fine. No one's drinking or fighting or anything. There's good music in the background, some live band. And all of a sudden, a young woman with a nice gown and, her makeup, her hair all done, walks up to me. Sergeant Fitzgerald? Yeah. Hi, I'm blankety blank. Yeah. And the name came to me, but now she's a young woman as opposed to a girl from, 4 years ago. And I said, yes. So I didn't ask her any detailed questions. Well, you look great. How are you? Well, this is my boyfriend. Introduced me. And she pulled me aside. I just want you to know, thank you so much for how you handled things back then. You made such a difference in my life. It was tough. I'm still talking to people about it, meaning like therapists. But, you were so professional. And my aunt and my mother now is appreciative of how you handled everything. And it was interesting seeing like a 4-year time span someone who, you know, matured from one level to another and have that satisfaction. One more case, real quick, and Ray knows it very well because we interviewed D. McDonald twice, but this came well after my bureau career. I helped out Victoria Police in Australia and on a stalking case, and they couldn't get the probable cause to arrest a stalker of a woman who dated this guy a few times, ended it, and then this guy stalked her for about 2 years. I did some forensic linguistic work, analyzing some documents in the case, and from 14,000 miles away, helped them get just what they needed to put handcuffs on this guy. He wound up confessing, admitting to things, and he got just about a year in prison, and he hasn't bothered her since. So, and we've stayed in touch with Dee, the victim, and she's very appreciative of the work that I did, and certainly the female detective, Beck Norris was her name, who actually ran the case from Victoria PD down under. So there's cases about maybe 40 years apart in my career, one involving a very young girl, and one a middle-aged woman, but I was very glad to help get results for them, and in both cases, put the bad guy away.
So, if we have enough time, because I do want to talk about like for as like a short amount of time after the show, but what advice would you give to young people, starting with Fitz?
I do it all the time. I raised 3 sons, and you know, I've given them advice. They mostly listen to it. I certainly get emails and Facebook, social media messages from young people all the time, and I try to respond to everyone, and who wants to become either FBI agents, FBI profilers, forensic linguists, something like that. And I do take the time, and I said, you know, follow your dream. Don't let anyone talk you out of it, but have alternatives in your life too. You know, get that degree, maybe even a graduate degree to keep yourself fully competitive, and maybe diversify a little bit from what your undergrad degree is in, maybe to your master's, so you have a broader spectrum. Because you may not know this, George, but when you're 17 or even 22, you can be a lot different person when you're 30. And so yeah, get the degrees. They'll never go bad. I said, you know, consider serving your country. You can do it kind of part-time with the National Guard. You can do it full-time and, you know, one of the other branches. You know, stay away from drugs, even if, you know, something's legal in your state. It's just stay away from it, including drinking. Social things are fine, but you don't want to go overboard and hurt yourself. And I used to tell people, don't do anything permanent before you're 30. So maybe even, you know, have kids, get married, tattoos. That's changed somewhat. But and if you're at 30 and you want those things, go for it full bore. But yeah, just respect yourself, respect others. And the final statement I would give someone, and I'll give it to you and anyone who's listening, if you believe you can, you're right. And if you believe you can't, you're right. And that applies to any part of life. So if you think positive, you're going to get positive results. If you think negative, you're most likely going to get negative results. So that's what I try to tell people. And the last thing I leave them with after advice is I ask them a favor. And this may apply to you someday, George, but I'll spend some time doing a Zoom call or some emails. I'll send some young people. At the very end, I'll say, do me a favor. This is called paying it forward. I said, someday you're going to be an expert or very well known in your field. And there's going to be some young person that sends you an email or whatever the way of, you know, direct telepathy, you know, in 20 or 30 or 50 years into your brain, whatever that is. Be willing to give them half hour, an hour or so of your time, and help them, impart to them some wisdom, some of your experience, some of your knowledge to help them along. And then you could ask them to do the same thing 30 or 40 years later. Now we're getting into the 22nd century here. But so I'll give them that time, that advice, and then say, hey, in 20, 25 years, when you're kind of approaching my age and my level of what I accomplished, be willing to do the same for younger people.
Good advice, Jim. Real good advice. Here's my issue. The young people today are coming up in a very, very different world than both Jim and I came up in. Very, very different. It's the world of communication, mass communication. There's so much information out there that it's easy to get duped. So easy to get duped and to be swayed into something that you don't believe. So here's my advice. Just because you're in college and there's a professor that tells you something doesn't mean he's got a lot of knowledge. He's got 5 degrees, 4 degrees. He's got a PhD.
Or she.
They're teaching for 30 years. And they say, this is the way it is. Just because they say that doesn't mean that it's true. So what I told my children, and I says, you don't have to, I want you to listen to everything, but don't make a decision based upon what someone else tells you. Seek and research the information on your own so that you can determine what the best decision is to be made for you, not for everybody else, but for you. And don't be swayed because somebody says this or somebody says that, or if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? That's not always the case. I'll give you one example. I had a student, it was in a master's level violent crime class. And we were talking about some left wing and right wing groups. And I came in, I said, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, BLM, are both domestic terrorist groups. And this African-American female came up to me after class and she says, Professor, I really disagree on your statement where you identified Black Lives Matter as a terrorist group. And I says, well, why? And she says, they've done a lot of good for the Black community. And I says, do you know what they've done? And she says, well, no, not really, but I just know I've heard they've done so much. And I says, well, here, rather than do the assignment this week, what I want you to do is I want you to research Black Lives Matter and come back and tell me what they've done. And if you come back and tell me that they've done a lot for the African American community, I says, I'll withdraw my statement in front of the whole class for you. She came back. She says, Professor Carr, she says, I'm sorry. She goes, I never knew what the type of individuals they were. And when you look when you look at Black Lives Matter, most of the money went to a certain group of people. Very little, if any, came into the African American communities to help these downtrodden, poor neighborhoods. It didn't. And there were millions and millions and millions of dollars that came in. Such a disjustice. And nobody's done anything about it, which is even sadder. So that's why I say, make your own decision. And she learned a lesson. She says, I learned a lesson that I'll take with me forever. Don't believe everything that someone tells you. Figure it out on your own. Everybody's looking for the shortcut. There are no shortcuts in life.
And go to multiple sources for that information, not just
Absolutely.
one. Mm-hmm. Again, we talked about myopia and
right.
the horse blinders early on. You need to have varied input. Even if someone, that website or that news outlet, I hear they always lie. Well, okay. In reality, sometimes they're more close to the truth than some other news outlets. So just have multiple avenues of information coming into you, and you'll have a much better life.
You're the author of your own story. You're writing your own book. So every chapter in your life is another chapter, and your life is another chapter in your book. So when you make a decision, you can't say, well, Ray and Fitz told me that this is what it is, so it's their fault. You made a decision. It's your fault. You're going to be held accountable for what you say and what you do. So make sure that when you do it, that you have all your information before you make your decision. That's one of the greatest things. If everybody would do that, I think we'd be in a lot better position. I think we really would.
Well, I appreciate both of your time. I'm going to stop the recording talk after the show. But do either of you have anything you want to add?
Jim?
Any final statements?
Yeah, I just want to say check out my website, jamesrfitzgerald.com, and about everything I do there, my books, my Penn West University courses, and TV stuff that I've done. Check it out there and listen to Cold Red. Nothing wrong with doing in one podcast, advertising another. So thanks for having us on, George, and I'll turn it over to Ray.
Yeah, again, my website, it's raymond.carr.com. Check out my website as well. You can also check out my book, 30 Years on the Run, The Hunt for the Most Prolific Bank Robber in U.S. History. It'll be a good read, and hopefully it'll be hitting the screen soon.
All right. Sounds good. All right. In 3, 2, 1.